Hello, it's Keith here, and this is lesson 9 of the platform-specific series of my 8086 assembly programming tutorials. Now, last time we had a look at writing my little chibi sound driver, which is a basic sound effect driver, and we made it work with the beeper speaker, which is the internal speaker of the MS-DOS machines. Now, of course, this isn't very good, and the later machines came with amazing things like Adlib and Soundblaster cards, which gave much better FM sound. So this time we're going to look at the Adlib sound. We're going to learn the basics of how to use it and how to make some simple sounds with it, and hopefully this will be a good starting point if you're trying to do something more advanced. In this example, we're only going to be looking at the Adlib OPL2 registers. These were supported by the original Adlib sound card, and some of the earlier Sound Blasters only had OPL2, but later on with Adlib Gold and the Sound Blaster 16 and some of the later Sound Blaster Pro as well, I believe, they went into OPL3, which is a more advanced system. Now we're only going to look at the basic one because I'm only going to cover the sort of fundamentals of making some simple sounds anyway, and also I like to cover the most primitive thing that's supported by the widest range, just to make stuff that will be useful to the largest number of people. So we're only going to look at the basics today. Now, if you want to go into details on this or really do anything more than I'm showing today, I would strongly suggest you download the documentation. You probably want the OPL2 and OPL3 documents. There is a link to them on my website. The OPL3 one is the most detailed. I didn't really find the OPL2 one gave enough information on how the operation signals combined. I was a bit surprised by that. There was this nice table in the OPL3 documentation which was completely absent from the OPL2, even though the OPL2 needs it. I don't quite understand that. But anyway, I'd suggest you download those, and if you are looking to do more advanced things, the Soundblaster document as well covers Soundblaster programming, but the Soundblaster programming document in its own right doesn't cover the Adlib stuff, which is the fundamentals of the FM synthesis on the Soundblaster. So I'd suggest you really get all of them and have a look at it. Okay, anyway, basically the way that the sound works on the Adlib sound cards is that the sound is split into channels. So these are different sound effects that could be playing at the same time. And at the level we're looking at, it is capable of up to 9. However, 3 of these channels can be used for drum instruments, hi-hat, tom drum, things like that. So if these are turned on as rhythm effects, then we only have 6 channels. Now, it's not really going to matter for us today. We're going to make a few simple drum sounds and a tone, but we're not really going to be too worried about it. However, each of these channels is split into 2 operations, and these operations combine together to create the final tone. And how these combine depends on which kind of sound card we have and the settings we use. If we just go over to one of the documentation files here, this is the OPL3 document, which has some extra stuff, but basically either the operations combine together in a linear format like this, or they combine together and are basically added together at the final stage like this. So it's a question of whether they're added together or whether it basically follows through, whether the sound follows through all of the operations. So there's sort of 4 being displayed here, but that's only supported by the OPL3. So as I say, if you want to know the details, you need to get the documentation. I'm only showing very simple samples today, or you'll only be hearing very simple samples, I suppose would be the better way of describing it. And part of the reason for that is I simply didn't have time to go into the details of this. I don't have a lot of experience with sounds. I've only made basic sound effects and things, and so I don't have the background in this, and it's a very technical subject that I could probably spend weeks doing, and I only had a few hours to get this example working. I really, at this time, could only prioritize what was needed to get chibi sound going. And so that's what I've done today. We've got enough to make some simple tones, and we're going to hear those in action. So let's start off by going over to our example code, and let's hear some of the sounds in action. So we will want our oscilloscope for this. And I've got this example today, and there's a bunch of calls to different subroutines that will make a sound. So we've got tone test, which will make a tone. We've got drum test, and we've got cymbal test, and the cymbal doesn't sound like a cymbal, and that's probably because I've used the wrong settings. I'm not quite sure. The rhythm effects also use the frequency settings, so if the settings are wrong, the instrument may play too quickly or something. I think that's what the issue is. Anyway, let's fire this up and let's hear the various sound effects. So that's a tone, that's a drum, tone, drum. That's supposed to be a cymbal. It doesn't sound like any kind of cymbal I would understand. So How do we do this? Well, what I've done is I've created a function called setReg. We pass this 2 bytes. The first byte is the register number we want to change, and the second byte in the AH is the new value for that register. And so we've got a variety of numbered registers here. The setReg function will set a single register. The setPair function will set both operations. It will set the matching pair or that operation, so it will set both of the pitch settings for that channel or both of the volume levels, things like that. How do we set these? Well, it's actually quite straightforward. Here's our setReg function. So basically all we need to do is write the number of the Adlib register we want to change to port 388, and then we write the value that we want to set that register to port 389. Now, I should point out that on the Soundblaster's ports for its FM synthesis and digital sound could be reconfigured. It was often done in the config sys, things like that. But my understanding is that all of those sound cards, because they maintained Adlib backwards compatibility, all do support this port 388 and 389 combination. That's at least true of the documentation I saw in the Soundblaster. So I think this is a good basic way of getting sound working on a lot of systems quickly. Okay, anyway, so what are these registers? Well, as I say, each sound is controlled by 2 operations, and so you can see the 2 operations here, and so there's pairs of registers that control the various elements of the sound. So for example, operation 1 of channel 1 is controlled by 20, operation 2 is controlled by 23, and 20, 40, 60, 80 and so on. Now basically the register numbers for the operations go up in ascending order, but then we add 3 to jump to the second operation of the same channel, and you can see there's some gaps in the numbering because of that. So basically if we wanted to set a pair of registers, we just set the register plus and then the register plus 3, so 20 and 23, 40 and 43 and so on. And so that's what I've done. I've got this setReg pair function that basically runs setReg twice and adds 3 the second time, and this is just an easy way of setting both operations to a value which will at least create some kind of sound. Now these Adlib registers all have different functions. Now at the start we've got a bunch of general ones here. These will be global, that affect all of the sound channels. We've then got a set that are exclusive to the operation, so there's 2 of these. As I say, you add 3 to get the second one, and then we have some channel exclusive ones here, and these have lots of weird terminology. You know, we've got stuff like a K-on, we've got things like a key scale level and an attack and a sustain, and things that you might not be particularly familiar with, and I would totally understand that, because before I started having to worry about annoying things like sound programming, I didn't really know what any of them meant either. Now I've drawn this little diagram which is based on the one in the documentation, but basically I think the best way to think of sound coming from these kind of FM synthesis systems is like a piano keyboard. Now if you think of your sort of classic piano keyboard, now when you press a key down, internally the piano will strike a wire and the wire will resonate, but then when you lift the key up there's a silencer, I believe, touches the piano wire and then stops the sound very quickly, and that is basically what most of these systems mimic. We've got what is known as K-on, which means key on, that's when the key is pressed down, and K-off, which is when the key is released. And then there are 4 stages in this system of how the sound volume is affected over that time. Now, as soon as the key is pressed, the sound will become very loud very quickly, and that is known as the attack stage. That will then reach a peak, and there will be a decay, and it will continue to decay quite quickly for a while, but then at some point the tone will have reached a sort of constant level while the key is still held down, and that is known as the sustain. Then when we release the key, that's known as K-off, or key-on equals 0 in the case of this system. We write a 0 to the K-on value, and that is known as release, and then the volume will rapidly descend to nothing. Now, depending on the settings we use, we could have a sound effect with a very fast attack, a very fast decay that basically almost immediately reaches nothing, or we could have one with a very slow attack, no decay, a long sustain, and a slow release, just depending on how we want the sound to start up and end as the key is pressed and released. As I say though, at least to some level, I think it's worth thinking of it from the point of view of a piano keyboard or a synthesizer keyboard, which of course emulated a piano in a lot of ways. Because, as I say, you've got to imagine that the sound will continue when the key is released, at least in some sense. Although, if there's a fast release, it will diminish very rapidly. So we need to control that, and we need to set a variety of these registers to valid values that will at least create some kind of tone. So we're going to need to set the total level, which is the volume, the decay rate, which is how fast it gets quieter after the key's been pressed, the attack rate, which is how quickly it gets loud, the release rate, which is after the key's been released, and the sustain level, which is the long-term sound while the key is being held down. The F number is the pitch itself. The K on is how we enable the sound. We set that to 1 to start the sound and set it back to 0 to make the sound stop, and then you'll just have the release as it fades away. We also have this rhythm mode option, which we'll look at as well. This is a single register that controls the rhythm channels and enables them. Now, if we enable the rhythm channels, we can use these sound effects, and some of them will use 2 operations and others will just use a single operation, and you can see how these are made up. Basically, the bass drum uses 13 and 16, but all the others just use a single operation. So they're basically splitting these channels into multiple instruments. And of course, we can only play 1 snare drum at a time. You can't use 2 channels to do the snare drum. It's not how it works. And these are controlled just by a single bit, and we set that bit to make the sound. But I believe I wasn't quite clear on how this works, but it seems you have to set it back to 0 again to release it before you can use it again, which I wasn't quite aware of until I tried it and it didn't work. But anyway, so that's what we're going to basically be doing today. We're going to be playing with making some simple tones and playing some simple drums and playing that thing that's supposed to be a cymbal. And if you know how to make the cymbal sound like a proper cymbal, please tell me where I'm going wrong. Okay, so first of all, we're going to need to set some settings up. So first of all, we're going to set up register 20, and what we need to set up here is the multiplier here, and we're just setting it to 1. Now, we are going to set a pair here, so we're going to set 20 and 23, and the reason for that is that, as I said before, this is a pair of registers that are controlling channel 1. So we're going to set 20 and 23 together, and we're doing that with this setRegPair function here. Then what we're doing is we're setting the key scale level, we're setting that to 0, and we're setting the total level, and total level of 0 is actually the loudest. Some systems it's the quietest and some it's the loudest. This one it's the loudest. We're setting a fast attack and a slow decay. We're going to have a tone that stays very constant when it's pressed. The sustain we're also going to keep very high, and the release we're going to have a moderate release. We want it to fade away a little bit slowly. Again, we're setting these in pairs. We're setting 60 and 63 and 80 and 83 via this setRegPair function, and again you can see these all here as marked as pairs in this column here. We're then setting the wave select. This is the type of sound. We're just setting this to 0 as a default value here. We are now going to set up the channel level settings. So these don't have a pair, they're just a single register each. So here we're setting the feedback setting. We can use this for distortion. We'll do that later. We need that for our chibi sound. We're then setting the pitch here. We're setting a quite high pitch here. These bits are part of the pitch in A0, but B0 has also part of the pitch along with the K, which is K on, and that's the important one. We want to set that K on to 1, and that will make the sound. We're then waiting for a while, and then we're releasing that K bit, which is the K off, and that will make the sound fade away after our pause. And that's how we made the tone that you can hear just there. So that was the first tone, which was repeated twice. So that's at least a basic example of how we can make a tone. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to look at an example of how to make a drum. Now rather strangely, it kind of didn't work how I expected, but basically we do have to set the vast majority of these settings again for this to work. So even though these are percussion, we still have to set things like the frequency and the attack and decay. But this time, rather than using the K on function, we use this alternate function, which is all handled by register BD in hexadecimal. Now, basically, we need to set bit 5 here to 1, and that enables the rhythm section, which overrides channels 7, 8, and 9 to be these percussion instruments. And then the bits 0 to 4 are the various drum types, and you can see them all here. And so here I'm enabling the bass drum here. You can see that B bit is set to 1. I'm waiting for a while and then I'm setting it to 0. And the reason I had to do that is because if I didn't, then it wouldn't play again the second time. As I say, it seems it doesn't automatically release, which kind of surprised me because the way it sounded, I assumed it would. But anyway, so that's how we can use that. There we're using the kick drum, but here we're using what they're calling the cymbal, but it never sounded like a cymbal when I tried to experiment with it. If you know how to make it sound like a cymbal, I'd love to hear what I'm doing wrong. Anyway, for today's example, I didn't actually care about cymbals, didn't care about the percussion at all. What we're doing in this example is we are upgrading the Chibi Sound driver. Now, Chibi Sound is my simple sound effects driver. It takes a single byte value and it makes a sound. So these are loud, distorted tones. These are quiet, clean tones. And then when we go over 40, they will be loud, clean tones. There we go. And then quiet, distorted tones. So we're going to have a look at this new version of the code. So this is an alternate version for Adlib. We looked at the version for the internal beeper, but this is the Adlib version. So we're using port 388 and 389, like before, and we're using the same setreg pair and setreg functions. So basically our byte that we pass to Chibi Sound is in AL, and it's got 6 bits that are the tone, 1 bit for the volume, 1 is loud, and 1 bit for the noise, 1 is on. First we check if it's 0. If it is, we're jumping to Chibi Sound Silent. And what does Chibi Sound Silent do? Well, all it does is it releases the K-on value for this channel. We're using channel 1 in all cases. We're only using one channel here. This isn't a multi-channel version. I do, in all seriousness, have a Chibi Sound Pro, which is a parody, the title is a parody of Soundblaster Pro, and that does support multiple channels, and we'll do some music later on. So yeah, as I say, this is a very basic one just for very simple sound effects. So that's how we silence the channel. If we're not silencing the channel, what we're doing next is we're checking the volume bit, and we're either going to use a value of 0, which, as I say, 0 is the loudest, or we're going to use a value of this, which is slightly lower, or slightly higher rather, because as I say, higher numbers are quieter. And we're going to pass that to the volume register at 40H. So that's setting our volume. What we're going to do next is set some of the constant values here. These are all just constants to make a nice tone. These don't get set by anything in the byte that we're passing over. The next thing we're going to do though is we're going to set the frequency. So what we're doing is we're taking the 8-bit value. Remember, only 6 of the bits are frequency bits. So we're shifting it to the left by 2 bits. And then we're passing it over to set the frequency in register A0 here, and that will set a nice frequency range. Now we can change the frequency range if we want by changing the bottom 2 bits of B0. I thought that setting these as 0 and 1 gave the nicest range for this effect, but if you wanted a different range you could change that code accordingly. Now we've now set the volume and the frequency, so the last thing we're doing is we're checking the noise bit, which is the top bit. Now, if this is set to 0, we're setting the feedback bits to 0, which gives a clean tone, but otherwise I'm setting 2 of them to 1. And then we're passing that to register C0, which will set the feedback, and it also sets the connection, which, as I said before, is this rather confusing thing of how the operations are combined together to make the final tone. But in all cases, I'm just setting that to 0 in this case. As I say, I'm not looking to create complex and artistic instruments. I'm just looking to make a simple beep. That's really all I was able to achieve with it in the time I had to work on today's example. So there we go. As I say, this is an alternative version to the beeper version before. Now, if you were going to be super clever, your game could maybe detect the Adlib and switch between them, or you could have a menu at the start to select the two. In my my little game, my Suckhunt game, I'll probably have some symbol at the start like use Adlib and use conditional compilation to disable one or the other. Just as I say, it's just for some simple sound effects in a simple game. Anyway, as I say, really this is nothing compared to what Adlib can do. It's just a simple example to get you started. So if you want to hear more, it's not see more, but hear more, please go to the website, download the example and have a play with it yourself. As I say, I will be doing a slightly more advanced example later on with my Chibi Sound Pro and hopefully getting some music playing. But there's no way I'm going to be able to cover the incredible capabilities of these systems, because I'm split between so many systems, and when I'm writing code I have to worry about what will work on multiple systems, and most systems don't have the capabilities of the Soundblaster 16, so I'm only working on what I can also do on the AY chip of the Z80. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this today. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.